Tension between law enforcement personnel and low-income non-white communities seems to be a never-ending problem. Today, our guests will share their vision for being a part of the solution and their vision for rethinking policing for local and global contexts. Please stay tuned. Welcome to Perspectives on Faith and Culture. I'm your host today, Karen Crozier, and today I'm joined by Carla Kirk, who is lead instructor of African American Studies at Fresno City College, Wesley Flowers, who is educator at Clovis North, as well as Chastity Neal, who is in service with AmeriCorps Vista. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Let's get to this deep conversation to see what are we doing today and how are we experiencing this tension between law enforcement personnel. What is your background and experience, Carla, with policing in your communities from your perspective?
My perspective is twofold. I have, first, a very positive experience with law enforcement. Much of my family works in law enforcement, both with the Fresno PD, with probation and parole, and so it's part of who my family is in service in that capacity. I have a secondary experience, and this comes through the students and their negative interactions, negative opinion, negative overall view of what law enforcement means, not only in the city, but in smaller venues such as our police force at Fresno City College. And so it's a duality with me, both part of my family and part of an issue in our community that is of great concern to my students.
Can you identify some of the things that your students are experiencing that you have heard or have seen?
Yes. Part of my duties at Fresno City College is I teach in two cohort student learning communities. One is called Adili and one is called Simba. Our Simba program focuses primarily of young men of color from different age groups. And overwhelmingly, their interactions with police have been negative, from what they feel is unnecessary traffic stops, harassment walking down the street, negative things that they have seen with their family, immediate family that they have witnessed, and it gives them just an overall very negative, very, just that there needs to be more done. There's no trust. There's no trust between the young men that I teach and the police services in this community.
Yes, and Mr. Flowers, as you being of African American descent as well as a male, what has been your experience as an educator professionally and or personally that you can speak to?
Well, I have concerns on both sides as well as Carla does. And frankly, I have a brother who's a police officer. I have an uncle who's on the police force as well, very high-ranking uncle in the police force. And so I have some concerns because here in recent days, there's been a lot of aggression and hostility towards police officers. And I don't never want anything to happen to my relatives simply by servicing, our communities as police officers. But at the same time, I do have some concerns of how African American males are treated with aggression from police officers as well too. And as a young African American male growing up here in Fresno, I can recall going to the Fresno Fair. And at that time, popping was a pretty popular activity amongst the youth. And so we had gathered around and we had locked arms to watch some youth perform some popping. And when we were doing that, we were met with some very aggressive cops, and me primarily. And I was grabbed by the hoodie of my sweatshirt and dragged out of the circle. And when I turned and faced the police officer and questioned why was I grabbed like that, he said, because you were popping. I said, I wasn't popping. I said, I was locking arms with others. I said, but even if I was popping, I said, what's wrong with that? He said, it's gang related. And so a lot of times when we just simply group up with one another, we're seen to be involved in gang related activities, when sometimes we're just simply having fun. And so I have some fears that I have a 13-year-old son, I have some school-aged nephews that I have some concerns with. If they gather and do similar, will they be met with that type of aggression? And they get the, the know-how to act when you're, in public conversations from myself and others. But at the same time, are they going to be treated with the same family type, communication from the officers out there in the public settings? And I think if police took the time to go into the communities and have meet and greets with the community, I think we can kind of offset some of these issues.
Thank you. And Chastity is being in a different generation, a little bit younger, and also not a native of Fresno. Share more about your background as well as your particular experiences from your native town.
Okay, well, yeah, I am fairly new to Fresno. I've been here roughly 7 months. And the way I see Fresno's police is in a really good way, if you ask me. They're really kind to me often. I know I'm beautiful, and that's usually it. They speak driving when they drive past me. They smile and they speak when they walk past. They do the same. And that's warm to me. I do feel safer there. But I come from Chicago, which is currently the murder capital. Granted, we haven't had any really known police brutality situations. The presence of the police, to me, is I don't feel protected by them. I feel more harassed, and that's still today, like right now. I had a recent instance with them, I would say last summer in Chicago. Myself and my roommate at the time were coming up an alley on my grandmother's street. I've been in this neighborhood 25 years, never been pulled over by a cop, never had any issues, anything. Just so happened this night, we turn out of the alley and the cop pull us over, and he's like, and he was immediately hostile with us, immediately. We're two women, we're both pretty. She has a University of Wisconsin sticker on her window, everything. So it's like, what was your reason for pulling us over? He immediately said, do you know what they do in this alley? And I'm like, yeah, I've been over here 25 years. My address shows that this is my block, although I don't live there. So one cop, he was an African-American man. The cop that pulled us over, he was actually a Caucasian cop. The African-American man, he actually stayed in the car. It seems like he was going through training or something like that. But the Caucasian cop came up to the window, and he was really hostile, and he was upset that the African-American man didn't get out the car. So he began to yell at him. And he was like, no, you need to tell her to get out of the car, talking to me because I was never asked to step out. So I stayed there. And he was like, no, you need to tell her to get out the car. If I tell this young woman to get out, you need to tell her. So he's sitting there, he saw my ID, and he was like, is this your address? I said, clearly, it's on my ID. This is my address. So he went and showed the man that or whatever. They went and they checked our information and everything. Nothing's on either of our backgrounds. But they're like, no. Then the guy came back and he apologized because my roommate, she said, well, last year I was robbed. And the funny thing is that you were the cop that helped me. She said, I remember that. You were the cop that helped me. She was like, I can't believe you just did that. She got out of the car after they checked our stuff, walked up to his window and did that. It was unheard of for you to even be able to step out of your car when the police are speaking to you or they told you to sit in there. But she got out of her car, she walked up and she said, you helped me when I was robbed last year or whatever. So when he came back and gave us back our IDs, he was like, well, I was just taking precaution pretty much. There is a lot of prostitution and drugs that have been happening over here. I wasn't, trying to come off like that or whatever, but it was like the bridge is already burned. You came out hostile, cursing at us and doing all this stuff, and we're just two young women, and clearly my address says that I live here. So for me in my city, the presence of the cops, it's more so harassment than protection. They sit on the corners, they just sit there. They don't try to get to know the people in the neighborhood. They don't go and participate in the schools. I grew up in an era where we had DARE. DARE was really prominent, the police program DARE. They came into our schools, the cops spoke to us. Right now I can't name one officer in Chicago, not one by name.
That is a very interesting point because when we look at the reality of the disconnect between law officers, even though they are part of our families, but what does it mean to be part of the communities in which they are supposedly to serve and protect? Piper, who is a writer and an artist, who does a one-man play of 17 different characters that highlights the reality of the dysfunction between law enforcement, low-income, non-white communities, and the ways that the media portrays the situation, and wants to address this problem. What do you think about his assessment of it being dysfunctional? It sounds like you would agree, but I want to ask the question, do you think that that is a dysfunctional relationship between the ways the media portrays us, or portrays African American peoples and other non-white low-income communities in relationship to law enforcement? We'll begin with you, Wesley. What are your thoughts on that?
I definitely think there's a dysfunctional relationship between the cops and especially, and I don't want to harbor on the relationship with African American males, but it seems like we are the ones who get the most hostility, the most aggression. And again, I think that it is going to require cops simply going into the communities and developing relationships there, and for this thing to offset. Because the aggression is leading to death, is leading to wrongful incarcerations. There's more African American males who are in the criminal justice system today than there were African American or African slaves in 1850. So there's something wrong there, you know. And until we make amends with, you know, the travesties of slavery and how it's currently affecting us, and in the way that police address African American men, we're gonna have a very bad problem.
Right, you cite Michelle Alexander's checks, the new Jim Crow, as she talks about the ways that mass incarceration has increased in the U.S. And as a quote unquote, we are an industrialized nation, but yet look how we incarcerating our own people. Chastity, do you want to share more about the dysfunction as you experienced it? Because it seems like everyone has this dual relationship, the good and the not so good. What do you think about Piper's dysfunctional description of it? Well,
I just absolutely agree that there is a disconnect. It's more interesting to me how the attitudes that this newer generation has in regards to law enforcement in general. I just remember coming up, I was like, oh, I may want to be a pediatrician or a firefighter or a cop. You never hear those things from youth these days. There isn't much interest in being a police officer or a law enforcement person these days. And I just think because just the presence in general is negative coming from where I come from. And you can, it really just depends. I'm a mentor. I'm a mentor to young women, and I've personally shared with them, you know, certain ways to approach situations. Being in group settings as African Americans, I don't know, I went to a predominantly African American school. We'll walk home from school together and be stopped for mob action because of the activity going on in the neighborhood. Again, it's a group of high school girls, and we're walking, and we could be stopped for mob action, and we live on the same block, right, but we can't walk in a cluster together home, you know? So I really just think it needs to be some educational or professional development that needs to be implemented into the law enforcement system. I actually just applied for a Senate fellowship at Sac State, looking forward to possibly staying in California. But I had to, and it was the assembly one, and I had to actually write a policy. And the policy that I chose was to create professional development into law enforcement. It's not that I'm reinventing the wheel. There's already programs that are there, you know. But I think from the standpoint of the law enforcers, they need to sit and have professional development on how to work in minority communities and how to build relationships with them, because it's not just the citizens. It is a lack of education, a lack of knowledge of how to even approach talking to young African American people.
Great. When we come back from the break, we will hear Carla's perspective on the dysfunction, and you all are doing a great job in providing us solutions. We'll be back after the break.
KNXT thanks all its loyal viewers and respected businesses who have supported your Catholic television station. Now you can support KNXT with program underwriting by having your name, your company's name, or organization associated with your favorite program. Detailed information about you or your company will appear before and after each program or day part you select. Keep the quality and spiritual message alive and make a difference. Call 559-488-7440 today or go online at knxt.tv to find out more about program underwriting on KNXT.
We're on. Back to Perspectives on Faith and Culture. I'm joined by Carla Kirk, lead instructor of Fresno City College of African American Studies, Wesley Flowers, who is college educator at Clovis North, not college, high school educator at Clovis North, and Chastity Neal, who's with AmeriCorps Vista. Before the break, we were discussing what is the nature of the dysfunction in light between the media, law enforcement, and low-income non-white communities in light of Piper, the artist, and what he portrays in his one-man show. Carla, we didn't get a chance to hear from you. Please share what you perceive to be the case.
Sure. There is absolutely a dysfunction, a criminal dysfunction in how African Americans are portrayed in the media. This is not only impacting our law enforcement, but how we view each other as Americans in this country together, that we're supposed to be all in together. So there is absolutely a dysfunction in how African Americans are portrayed to not only other Americans, not only law enforcement, to the entire world. That dysfunction does come over. I do see, in my opinion, it does spill over into how our neighborhoods are policed. A dysfunction that I would see is when I was a kid growing up, on the side of police cars, it said to serve and protect. On our police cars today, they are timely, efficient, and professional. And while those are excellent qualities in your profession, it doesn't mean the same thing to me. And so I believe the dysfunction is driving around. It's on the cars that are driving around. As Wesley and Chastity both said, part of the dysfunction is in who is policing which neighborhoods. I remember police officers when I was a child who would drive around and knew people in my family. We don't see that anymore. I don't see the degree of outreach from our officers, from our service officers to the young people to try and bridge that disconnect, that dysfunction that's being portrayed in media between us. It seems to be exasperating. So as they said, that degree of outreach, that degree of connectivity, that idea that you're here to protect me, the police are going to come help me if I need help, I'm glad they'll be on time and I'm glad they'll be professional, but it does not mean the same thing as to serve and protect.
Yes, and many of you are bringing up the need for professional development, for education, for policy change in light of what needs to happen in law enforcement, for community law enforcement, more positive relationship instead of a dysfunctional relationship. Piper, the artist who we discussed in light of his one-man play, became in law enforcement after the Oscar Grant killing up in the Bay Area in Oakland. And he realized that the people that showed up there for that rally, what would happen if all the police officers that we considered to be bad apples were gone, who would take their places? And he said nobody there would volunteer, so he had to check himself to say, wow, what does that mean for me? Because are we not really helping the problem if nobody is there to step up to rethink what policing can be and to undo the harm and violence that is being perpetrated? So that was his solution. So he paid for his own way into the academy and is now a sheriff in Alameda County today. On the sheriff's department, not the sheriff. But what do you think are some other solutions that you have identified or anything you would like to go into more detail on? Chastity, let's begin with you.
Well, I think that in light of what he did, I think that that's amazing. And myself and my colleagues and my peers, we discuss that really often, us being, you know, this younger generation, but we understand because we lived at a time before social media existed. We're the last ones, you know. So we discussed us being the solution. We have to be the solution because we don't have those civil rights leaders that we once had before. We don't have those leaders stepping up anymore. The closest we've gotten to that is a Black president. And even our celebrities aren't stepping up and taking it on our behalf. They'll take the money and take the support, but won't speak up on it because they don't want to lose that. I think that's amazing. In a way that I feel like I would be able to assist in that because I'm not interested in doing law enforcement, but I'm definitely interested in educating my people. I've actually gone as far as to create a curriculum as far as teaching our youth, mentoring our youth in professional development and how to handle those situations, those encounters. And we have to start to implement those things. I believe that traditional education is never going to leave. It's going to be there. We have to do it. Although our kids, you know, are lacking in the traditional education area, I feel like we have to enrich them in another way, and we have to include that into our traditional curriculums. We need to literally teach them how to live in this new diverse culture that we have, one thing, and even teach them, mentor them on how to work with cops, how to speak. If they stop you, what to say to them, what do you need to do, you know, just those simple things.
To know your rights.
Know your rights.
Yes, and I appreciate the mentoring and the curriculum development because that's very progressive for our day that we need it. Carla, please share, what do you think is part of solutions?
Part of the solution, I will say this briefly, is that when I was a student at Fresno City College and I was being mentored by Kayende Sowalze, who led that program for 40 years, I remember in his office there was a photo of Malcolm X in Ghana, and the legend under that picture said, "A part of the solution." And while I was a student there and while I was completing my advanced studies, that's something that always stuck with me. I was very happy that Mr. Sowalze gave me that when he retired. And so being a part of the solution is fundamental to who I am. Some of the solutions that I would see right off is encouraging young people like Chastity. She is absolutely correct that there has been a vacuum of leadership in the African American community for the last 30 years of my life. I remember what it was like when there was leadership and when there was community there, and I have watched it disintegrate. And there has been no concerted effort to fill that void, to mentor these young people, to let them know you're the new leaders, you're the ones that we need to stand up. And also, like Piper, who I must say, his work is incredible. His film, his music video, Believe, had me in tears. It has me ready to go to Oakland to see that if we can't get him here. In the Simba program, we have students who come in who are interested in criminology. I will say that honestly, I have diverted a lot of young men away from criminology and into education. I would much rather see them in the classroom than walking the halls of one of our many, many, many prisons here in California. So part of the solution is, yes, what we are getting our young men to do, how we are getting them. If we can get a generation of teachers that can start teaching the next generation what's expected of our communities, what's expected of young men, what's expected of young women. If we could start that bridge building yesterday, I could see the history shows that this is what will bring us to peace.
Wesley, thank you.
I'm going to borrow a little bit from Carla, I'm going to borrow a little bit from Chastity and say that we do need to continue mentorship. And I think that mentorship needs to come by way of the police officers and by our own community. In the 60s, the Black Panthers would hand out different little booklets that would provide you your rights on how to deal with police officers. I think we need to return to that. And also I think that Black officers need to take the initiative to educate white officers who go into the Black communities. And if they can advise them, just like the Black Panthers advised the Black community on how to conduct themselves and how to know their rights, I think that the Black officers can teach their peers on how to be equitable when they police the Black community. And if we have both sides working on that, I think we can offset some of these issues.
Yes, or all sides, because we have a very multicultural, diverse police force, right?
Absolutely.
And even with women, with the gender politics, and how do we help our women to gain access to who they can be in providing a different model of connecting and relating in light of just seeing it as doing business as usual. As the show's getting ready to come to an end, and we have shared a lot about solutions, a lot about what the tensions and dysfunctions are, in 30 seconds or less, what do you hope the viewing audience will walk away with from this show? Let's start with you, Carla.
If I had one thing to take away from this show is that the overwhelming majority of our law enforcement are very good people who are committed to their jobs. And as Wesley said, I believe there needs to be some accountability in law enforcement for those few bad apples who are making relations with everyone bad. So the important thing is to continue this conversation.
Great. Wesley.
I think we need to commit to working with law enforcement and hoping that they can become more equitable in their approaches in the community. And I think that we need to commit to educating our community on their rights and how to conduct themselves when dealing with police officers.
Chastity, 15 seconds.
I absolutely agree with that. I think we need to commit to educating our families and our communities on how to handle the law enforcement or how to work with the law enforcement.
Well, thank you all for being on the show and of sharing your visions for a different reality for policing in our communities. Thank you for watching the show today, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Take care and God bless.